Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me for this Reset Air Certification Standard version 2.0 for accredited professionals webinar. This webinar has been personally crafted for you, our Reset APs, in order to give you a proper update on the changes that have been made to the Reset standards, formerly known as Reset Pre-Release version 2.0, and to explain thoroughly the reasoning behind the changes that were made. And for our current trusted APs, this education service is provided at no charge, and it will allow you to take the updated 2.0 AP exam to renew your Reset Air accreditation. Since its inception, Reset Air has benefited from our esteemed Reset Fellows, accredited professionals, and expert community who all have worked really diligently on the very first Reset Air projects in the world. And with each project, the Reset Air certification became stronger from the collective knowledge and a unified effort to uphold the standards, core intentions, which, remind you, are to regenerate our ecological, social, and economic environments via human health, and to make occupant health a measurable deliverable for all buildings and all spaces. So after years of hard work, we are thrilled to release the Reset Air Standard version 2.0 as of January 2018. My name is Anjanette Green, and I'm the Director of Standards Development for Reset, and I'm going to be your host today to walk you through all the changes that were made, as well as to give you some brief updates on where Reset is today. So the agenda with that is going to encompass a couple of things. So we're going to cover the current state of Reset Air, the Reset Air approach and our philosophy, project transition process, what this is going to mean for you and your project teams, accredited professionals, what this means for you as a Reset AP, the review of the Reset Air version 2.0 standards, and that includes both commercial interiors and core and shell, and then a little bit about what's to come. So the current state of Reset. In just 2 years, Reset has seen rapid growth in adoption. Our growth from 2016 to 2017 has been extremely impressive, up to where we now have over 80 projects. And looking forward to 2018, we are projected to see a combination of both registered and certified projects representing about 1.4 million square meters of real estate globally. So we're pretty excited to see the uptick in that. And in addition, the partnership with that steady growth is the equally impressive expansion of our AP network. So looking at this heat map, you can see that our numbers to date are representative of where our trusted and trained AP professionals are, lending their research and consulting services around the world. And what's more, we're really excited to see concentrations of these Reset Air APs in areas where indoor air quality expertise is really needed the most. So in countries such as China and India, we're seeing exponential growth, and we believe that we'll see this continue in the years to come. I want to talk a moment about the idea of getting back to basics and a return to project team ownership, as this played a really key role in the revision of version 2.0. One of the core tenets of the Reset Air standard is to be a non-prescriptive standard. Our aim has always been to allow project teams to come up with solutions benefiting their unique scenarios and give them the freedom to explore any pathway that achieves the end goal of healthier spaces. So the standard never wanted to police projects. We never felt that that was our role. And this philosophy and approach is noticeable throughout the official 2.0 version. You'll see that it sort of leans heavily on returning the accredited professionals and auditors to a position of authority and allows the team to act as a whole for project review and team submission. So the AP is not to come up with every project solution devoid of any team input, but it's rather a collaboration. So the responsibility is therefore on the entire project team and the AP equally to understand the intent of the Reset Air standards and to apply them to their specific projects. The project team as a whole must be able to defend their choices, methodologies, and calculations. And we are continually pushing the envelope in the realm of data monitoring and reporting for the built environment. And because of this, there will always be considerations made for projects that don't quite fit the commercial interior or core and shell profile. So don't be deterred if your project doesn't quite fit under the CI or CS typologies. Instead, we'd like to hear from you. We are always working on pilot projects and case studies to bring more building typologies into the Reset Air certification process. So if you have a project that you would like to contribute to the pilot program, please reach out to us. You can either email me directly from the information on the previous slide or send email to the reset.build project team. And then something to remember, and something that I think is very helpful when you're trying to describe Reset to people who are not familiar with it. An elegant way to describe Reset Air is to inform them that Reset Air is a standard first and a certification second. Because Reset Air has codified critical components of monitoring and reporting indoor air quality data, the standard is very nimble and easily adopted into other certification programs or company standards. And this is why so many organizations and other green building certification programs are performing crosswalks with Reset Air or adapting it directly into their certifications as a compliance path. Because Reset Air is wholly operational and focuses on monitoring and reporting indoor air quality results, the Reset Air standard is therefore a tool and can really help achieve multiple goals, credits, or other green building criteria. And you'll see this is evident in an example I'm showing here from Fitwel. Strategy 6.3, Indoor Air Quality Policy, references Reset Air as an acceptable certification that meets the requirement. And coming down the pipeline, you'll be seeing this more and more as we harmonize with other certifications. We'll be making those publicly noticed in our newsletters as those occur. So the transition process, what does this mean for project teams? If you have a project that submitted documentation under the pre-release version, you've been approved to proceed with a deployment plan, and you are proceeding either in the middle of your certification or you're about ready to deploy under that pre-release version, your project is grandfathered in and you continue on your path towards certification. You need not concern yourself with the changes that were made during the Reset Air version 2.0. That pre-release certification, I want to inform everyone very clearly that it is still an official certification and your project will always be recognized as being properly certified under pre-release. Your projects will continue to apply the pre-release target thresholds to maintain your certification. Your audit, you will only be required to maintain those particular targets. You will not be required to adjust to the version 2.0 performance targets. Now, projects who want to transfer their project from a pre-release standard to the new version 2.0 are welcome to do so. However, your project is required to email the individual that's listed here, who is our head director of the submission team process. So you need to alert her that that is your intent. Your project also must adhere to the new 2.0 certification process, which means you need to submit your project information and a pre-deployment plan for approval and confirmation prior to proceeding under any of the Reset Air Standard version 2.0 requirements. As of January 31st, 2018, all new projects must follow the Reset Air Standard and submit documentation accordingly. And what does the new version mean for the Reset Air accredited professionals? Well, for a moment, I want to take into account the different hats and the different roles that our APs are wearing and expected to do. First and foremost, you're a champion for the program. And this is a way to inform the community of the importance of knowing more about indoor air quality and how it impacts human health. You need to inform them of what Reset Air is and how it's a tool to help them with this pursuit. Second is serving as a professional consultant, bringing added value to projects that haven't heard of Reset Air. So as an AP, you open doors for added project scope and you can charge consulting fees for your services as required. The third is probably the one that most people are familiar with, where projects might already know of Reset and they are contacting you to assess their project and help with the requirements of needing to have an accredited AP on the project. This is often the case when projects are attempting multiple certifications, such as LBC or WELL, or in the case that I mentioned before, FitWell. And the fourth is performing audits on behalf of Reset. And this you'll be called upon to do so as a paid position, and you would be called upon to assess a project site. It's a boots on the ground audit where you would need to be taking account photographs and looking at the pre-deployment plan to ensure that that plan has been adhered to. So what this means for version 2.0 is that in order to work on projects under the new version, you need to have an understanding, of course, of the revisions, which means you need to pass your version 2.0 exam. So I encourage all of you to do so after the end of this webinar. We'll have information available through email about how to get the link to take your version 2.0 exam. So after this webinar, as mentioned, an exam link will be available to you to update your AIR accreditation. Passing the exam is required in order to work as an AP on Reset version 2 projects. The exam, as always, is administered online, and you're required to pass it within one month of receiving that exam link. Now, coming down the pipeline, I want to inform everyone that taking the exam in this way is the last time we will be doing that. The new format that we're moving to will be comprised of compulsory webinar modules that must be viewed as prerequisites, and then an in-person training will follow that on-site with a practicum exam that you will take in a room that's proctored by the trainer. The practicum and the on-site training is hands-on, and you will be expected to calculate a deployment plan for both a CI and CS project scenario. And then this is in addition to passing a knowledge exam that will be administered online. So again, I encourage everyone to take advantage of the link that will be sent to you after this webinar, because you will be again offered an opportunity to update free of charge, and you will not be subject to the on-site practicum. And finally, before I move into the standard revisions, I want to give a proper thanks to our APs, all of you and our expert advisors, and all the fellows who participated in our peer reviews. We conducted 4 formal peer review sessions that began in November of last year and continued up until mid-January of this year, 2018. And we had input from experts around the globe representing 5 countries and from a wide array of professional backgrounds. And additionally, I thank all of our Reset APs again who have been putting standards into practice in the field, because without your input, support, and your enthusiasm, we would not have been able to further refine and develop the standard. So on behalf of GIGA and the entire Reset team, we offer you our deepest thanks and appreciation. So with that, let's move into the technical review of the newly revised standards. And throughout the document, for the purposes of this webinar, I'm not going to address every page of the standard of the Reset AIR introduction or of the subsequent standards or the processes for certification. In the interest of time, I'm going to be focusing on the parts of the standard that received revisions or changes from the pre-release version. And in sections where they have had alterations or changes, I'm indicating it with a red outline. Some of the changes are quite minor, while others are very significant. So the red notations are here to help you and act as a reference. So our table of contents have remained the same. And in the Reset AIR sort of background piece, the introduction, I want to point out that minor changes were made to better highlight the requirement of carbon monoxide monitoring in projects. So CO has a larger prominence throughout the document. Now, while CO was always and continues to be a requirement for projects having combustion, the CO target was not previously listed in these slides and was therefore often overlooked by project teams. And additionally, the Reset AIR introduction didn't have any background information regarding the dangers of CO and why it is an indoor air quality concern. Therefore, the information pages were updated, and you'll see this in several slides to come. The dangers of PM 2.5 remain an interest for us as far as particle counts and targets. The effects of CO2, in addition, have remained the same, as has VOC off-gassing. So those different pollutants remain the same with no changes. However, as mentioned, we did add the dangers of carbon monoxide page so that teams have some information on why that is a pollutant of concern. Again, no changes to Y Reset Air, and no changes to the certification types for commercial interiors and core and shell to be applied for both new and existing. Now, one thing I want to take a moment and do point out is that we have done away with the space types within these two typologies. So formerly in the pre-release, we had hotels, we had different requirements for schools. Different space types have now been absorbed in an elegant way to fit under these two typologies, commercial interiors or core and shell. And again, this was from input by our peer reviews to streamline the process and make the standard a little bit easier to calculate for deployment. So jumping into the air standard for commercial interiors. Again, you'll see a highlight notifying the team that carbon monoxide is something that needs to be covered in areas that have combustion. And as I mentioned in my earlier introduction of this webinar, we intentionally wanted to ensure that APs are not put in the position of policing projects, and that reset is not a prescriptive standard, but rather performance standard. So here on slide 2.2.1, we address this approach and explain that the onus is on project teams and the AP equally to understand the intent of the Reset Air standards and apply them to their specific project. Since no two projects are alike, we enunciate that every project team needs to take time to learn and understand the unique uses of their particular project and think holistically about their indoor air quality monitoring approach. So in a word, a proper indoor air quality monitoring deployment plan can never be achieved by simply looking at a floor plan and room names. Project teams really need to put forth the effort to both understand how spaces are used by the occupants and at what frequency, and submit reasonable proof to back up their assessments and their calculations. And again, this is just reiterating the idea that we want projects to exercise their right to be innovative and creative and think of ways that will actually address indoor air quality dependent upon how their spaces are being used. And again, you'll notice a small appearance of CO in the performance targets. And just again, a reminder that CO monitoring is only required for projects with spaces with combustion. So we go through the indoor air quality performance targets on the following pages. The targets did not change from pre-release. You'll see listed both basic and high performance. And then again, the CO target has been added. Again, only places with combustion need to comply with the CO performance target. Nothing new on the data analysis algorithm. However, I do want to point out that a companion document will be developed to help explain further the data analysis. I'll talk about that in a moment. And for data provider requirements, again, not necessarily a change from the pre-release version, but rather a better description for the data display requirements. Here, the revision helps to clarify some former ambiguity around who is required to have access to the indoor air quality data and what is considered acceptable as a method of data access. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody had a fair understanding of how you would actually impart that data and that information to the people of your space who are occupying it. Again, the monitor requirements remain the same. Reset only accepts grade A and grade B monitors, not grade C. Consumer grade monitors are not allowed. We would not want to allow data from those types of monitors onto a project. The information is not reliable enough. And I do want to point out the installation requirement change here. This was to be in exact alignment with the ASHRAE standard, and it meant a really minor change from what was formerly in the pre-release version. The pre-release had a breathing zone of 750 to 1800 millimeters, but we changed it to 900 in order to harmonize with the standard that is in use as an ASHRAE reference. And notice the minor language change where hard wiring is recommended but not mandatory. While we always encourage hard wiring, we felt it was not our position to make this a mandatory requirement, but we do indeed list it as a recommendation. Now, steps for calculating monitor deployment. This is going to be the most significant change to the standard. Gone are the different space types, as I mentioned, that were part of the pre-release version. And during our peer reviews and our subsequent revisions to the standard, we really made every effort to come up with an elegant and streamlined approach that could cover every commercial interior project type. Now, having said that, this streamlined step-by-step approach leans heavily on the concepts I mentioned before, namely that a project team needs to be very clear and understand how their space is being used, who the occupants are, and where they are spending their time. Without this information, the calculation methodology is impossible to execute with any accuracy. So I'm going to go through the steps one at a time, and we will be applying it to the example that is included in the standard. So step 1, you need to define the project boundary. And the project boundary should be defined by a clear boundary such that the project is physically distinct from other interior spaces within the building. And this definition is very much borrowing language from USGBC's LEED definition. And again, we did this as an effort to harmonize with USGBC's requirements so that teams who are pursuing LEED have a similar project boundary, and therefore it's not in conflict with any of those other certification pursuits. The project boundary, once it's defined, has to remain consistent for all of your subsequent calculations. You're not permitted to unnecessarily meander or exclude portions of your building, your HVAC system, or any interior spaces that would unfairly allow the project to achieve any of the Reset Air Standard requirements. And project teams are expected to submit a detailed description that describes and clarifies what is deemed the project boundary for their specific project. And they have to substantiate that boundary by submission of a floor plan. And the document requirements are in section 2.3. So this is an example of how you might see the definition of a project boundary submitted for certification. You can see in areas such as vertical access, elevators, stairs that perhaps are owned by the building and are not falling under the responsibility of the tenant would be outside of the project boundary. And again, this is very much in keeping with other projects' requirements. Other certification bodies have a very similar requirement that mean that anything that you as a leaser or a tenant of the space, anything that you are responsible for would be included in your project boundary. Step 2 is to determine the total number of occupants within that project boundary. You need to calculate the total number of occupants, which are any individual, be they an employee, a visitor, a client, or anybody else inhabiting your space within the boundary for more than 1 hour per day. And you need to indicate those occupant totals on the floor plan. And it should be based on where each occupant is spending the majority of their time. So to clarify, if you have one individual who spends maybe a significant amount of time in a conference room and a significant amount of time in their dedicated seat, you need to make the decision of which of those two locations they spend the majority of their time, and that is where you would indicate them on the floor plan. You need not split an occupant between two places. The project team has to submit a detailed but brief informative statement that helps us understand how you've arrived at your occupant totals. And this is a sample of what that might look like. So on the plan, I've indicated one individual in private offices, for example, a couple of people at the reception desk, and individuals that are placed around the furniture in the open floor plan. I have not placed individuals in areas such as pantries or kitchens because, again, while people may be spending some of their time there, they're not spending the majority of their time there. So you'll notice on those areas, even though they're marked as a use space, they do not have a dedicated occupant. Step 3 is to calculate the percent of those occupants. So depending on the type of certification you would like to pursue, whether it be full or partial, you apply some math to that. Full certification requires 80% of occupants or more. Partial is 30% of occupants. So the calculations, again, are to be rounded up to the nearest whole number, and this is representative of the occupants that would be breathing air in your space. So it's a simple math equation. In my former slide, I had a total occupancy of 129. Full certification would mean that I need to monitor the air being breathed by 104 occupants. Partial would be 39 occupants. Step 4. Itemize your regularly occupied space types. So we would like you to create a list of all the regularly occupied spaces that are within your project boundary, as defined by people who are occupying those spaces for more than 1 hour per day. So space types are defined by their use and function, and this is really important. So depending on individual project scenarios, transient spaces, corridors, elevators, stairways, and that type of thing are not regularly occupied and potentially will not be on your project in space type list. However, due to the complexity and uniqueness of all spaces through projects in the built environment around the world, project teams really have to think about this themselves and define and defend their inclusion or exclusion of different space types. Now, I also want to reiterate that these are not steps that are replacing one another, but these are all steps that happen individually. So think of step 3 and 4 as 2 steps that have to happen, not 2 steps that actually exclude or in any way compete with one another. So separately, my step 4 looks like this. My itemized regularly occupied spaces are on the list that you see on the left. Reception, conference room, teleconference room, open workstations, private office cafe, and breakout area. Now your project may have more or less space types, again, depending on the function of those rooms. One thing you'll see is that I've decided that all of my open workspaces perform with one function. Therefore, they are listed as one space type. My private offices could vary in size. Perhaps I have a very large private office, maybe an executive office or a VIP office, and then I might have small enclosed offices. But whether they're large or small, the function is still a private office. Therefore, I do not necessarily need to itemize those rooms as different space types. Now again, this is to the discretion of the project team, but because these are actually performed in addition to your occupants, in addition to several other steps, it sort of doesn't matter how you itemize your spaces for the deployment of the monitor calculation, and you'll see why in a moment. So really project teams need to think about, how does your office space work? How does your commercial interior space function? How many people are in spaces, with what frequency, with what concentration, and what is the function? And that space type list, again, is going to be a very personal review, itemized based on a case-by-case basis. So step 5 is to deploy one monitor in each of those regularly occupied space types. Now this does not matter if there are people occupying the space or not. It's a regularly occupied space that made your inventory list. So this is your first bare minimum monitor calculation, one monitor in each space type. So again, on my list of itemized room to the left, for example, my monitors would be a total of 7. And I've indicated that with the blue triangle throughout the project. And again, as mentioned before, while in my cafe, I do not list any occupants regularly in this space because most of them have dedicated seats. I do need to place a monitor in here because it has made my itemized list. So again, as we move through the steps, think of these as separate instances and separate isolated deployment calculations. So step 5 is for full certification. Again, if you remember, step 3 for full certification indicated that I needed to have a percent of occupancy covered, which in this case was 104 occupants. 80% of my occupancy is 104 total occupants. So monitors currently cover 103 occupants, and that was due to my requisite space type deployment indicated by the blue triangles. But in order to cover 104 occupants, I need to cover one more individual. Therefore, an additional monitor is needed, and you'll see that with the green monitor. Now I can place that monitor wherever I see fit as long as I increase the number from 103 to 104 occupants total. Step 5, alternate Similarly would be for partial certification. And if you think back again to step 3, my partial certification, which was 30% total occupants, arrived at a number of 39 total occupants. That's a lot less than my full certification. And because of my standard deployment requirements indicated by the blue triangles, I have already met my partial certification. The initial 7 monitors already covers the occupants, so no additional monitors are required. And the final step, step 6, is that you need to ensure that one monitor is only covering a maximum of 500 square meters of project space. Now, space types that exceed 500 square meters require additional monitors in order to ensure complete coverage. This only exception to this rule is through an air uniformity test. And this can be done if you are thinking you would like to deploy in areas that you think have extremely uniform air, such as a very large conference center, perhaps a very large auditorium. But you need to look at the definition in the glossary for the methodology of how to test, and the testing does need to be submitted prior to any further deployment. It would be in tandem with your pre-deployment plan. So in our case, to ensure that we have deployed properly, the space type, open workstations, is bigger than the 500 square meters size limit. So we need to deploy an additional monitor to satisfy the range requirement for monitoring. Now we understand that air is not square, but our requirement is in square meters. So we would like teams to indicate in square meters an area that shows what coverage you have from your monitors as they are deployed for your occupancies, as well as for your space types. And then if there is a space that is not covered, you would need to indicate that, such as I have in the red square. So putting a monitor in the middle of that, I have now a total monitor requirement for partial certification of 8 monitors and for full certification of 9. So again, by going through this, you can see the differences between the steps and the stages of monitor deployment by the colors being used. The mandatory list is in blue, the makeup of the difference for full certification in green, and my 500 square meter in red. And those are the final steps. So once you have done that, you could move into the glossary, and we've added this to help further clarify important terms and concepts as per the Reset Air standard. And while this is not exhaustive of every term, the glossary is really meant to provide additional information and definitions for the purposes of correctly applying and calculating monitor deployment and adherence to the Reset Air standards. And within this, you'll understand why it's under the reset lens for the definitions of project boundaries, the proof of uniformity test, as I mentioned, regularly occupied spaces, space types, and that concludes the commercial interior standard. Now, when it comes to the commercial air interior certification process, nothing significant has changed. The process still remains the same and is largely done online. But I want to point out one piece in the registration phase 1. There's now a requirement to submit a pre-deployment plan, and you heard me mention that a couple of times. This pre-deployment plan must be reviewed and approved prior to executing your reset monitors. And this has really helped to prevent errors in monitor locations and incorrect monitor quantities. It's really in your best interest to follow this, because once it's approved, that pre-deployment plan is what your project team is held to for the purposes of the audit and for certification. So you really want to make sure that you understand that that pre-deployment plan is critical in your process, and nothing can actually be officially approved until that is submitted. That review will go to the reset.build, and once you have done that, you're free and able to go ahead and proceed with your deployment plan and pursuit of certification. The site audit, again, as I mentioned briefly, is a boots on the ground requirement. And then the data audit. Again, the data audit is looking at the different thresholds, the information of your targets, depending on high performance and basics, if you're doing commercial interiors, to ensure that you're actually meeting the targets required to achieve certification. And then there's a little additional information on ongoing certification requirements, the fees, a performance check, communication and education, and the site audit. None of that has significantly changed, but one thing I did want to bring out is that we did introduce a flow chart. So this is a nice graphic that helps to explain the certification phases, and hopefully you can better understand the process of either passing or failing each of the different phases and how to maintain your certification once you are certified. The certification fees, again, I'll show you a couple of slides at the end of this. They're always available for you to actually see, dependent upon the size of your project. It will break down both the data audit, the site audit, and the certification fees for you. So if you have a project that you would like to submit, you have some idea of what the hard costs would be for your certification. That, again, remains unchanged. And that concludes the commercial interiors. So I would like to go into the Reset Air standard for core and shell. Again, we have a clean table of contents to actually help you, and a preface. Again, our intent and our philosophy is reiterated here, and our certification approach. Echoing what I explained earlier, we again do not feel that we should be policing projects, but because there are so many influencing factors, such as location and orientation and climate, the structure of equipment, the different solutions and mechanical systems are so different from project to project that for us to introduce a prescriptive method would be inaccurate and would leave out ideas of innovation for project teams. So again, the certification approach is here just to remind everyone that we look to you to tell us what your unique project is, and we will hold you to defining that as we go through the different steps for monitor deployment. This is an important change for the indoor air quality performance target that I really want to point out. For PM 2.5, you'll notice that we changed the performance target requirement from 12 micrograms per cubic foot over the previous 15. And this is better to align with the more stringent requirements that we see across global regulation and certifications. This does not, however, affect the 75% reduction target goal. That remains the same from the pre-release to version 2.0. You still need to prove that your system is able to remove, hence filter, 75% of your particulate. However, this goes into effect when the outdoor levels of PM 2.5 are greater than 48 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, previously this number was 60, but we have moved it to 48. And again, because we're performance-based and not prescriptive, the project has to demonstrate that it's able to filter 75% of that PM 2.5 at minimum. But again, that only occurs when the ambient levels are in excess of 48 micrograms. Otherwise, you need to hold the 12 micrograms consistently. TVOC, CO2, temperature, and humidity remain unchanged. Again, the data analysis algorithm, if you would like to read more about that, there will be information available that goes deep into that in a companion document. And the same information about the data provider requirement. Again, we just wanted to clarify how that data can be given to the occupants, and we wanted to have clear indication of who the occupants were. So just a little bit of clarification. Again, grade A and B are only allowed on projects for core and shell. Grade C monitors are never allowed on Reset Air projects. So this is an important piece to illuminate on. The monitor installation requirements. It's not a change necessarily, but again, a clarification as to why we require both indoor and outdoor data. So in order to certify for core and shell, the whole objective is to demonstrate that the building's mechanical HVAC system delivers air to the building occupants and adhere to the Reset Air performance targets. Now, in order to do that, you have to have a baseline. So you need to be able to compare your outdoor air quality and your indoor air quality. And by asking you to pair monitors, this is a fairly new concept, but to pair these monitors, the indoor with the outdoor, you're going to be getting data that's more relevant to one another to yield more valuable data results. And again, this was a result of talking extensively with our peers, and we're thankful because we do believe that this is going to be a lot more robust information used for comparison purposes. So the outdoor monitor requirement remains the same. You need to install this, the same requirements as in the pre-release. The requirements for what parameters must be detected remains the same, and it has to be installed at a location that is pre-filtration and pre-mixing. Again, this is for your outdoor monitor location. For outdoor air, there's a new requirement, a change, as far as where you would deploy them and how many, based on the building size. And I'll talk about this again in the following slides, but I'll read this off here for the moment. Projects consisting of 10 stories or less and designed with only one outdoor air intake require one outdoor monitor that must be deployed at that air intake. For projects consisting of 10 stories or less and designed with more than one outdoor air intake, one outdoor monitor must be deployed at the air intake that the project team deems representative of the poorest outdoor air conditions. Now, again, this allows teams to really think for themselves. And as I mentioned before, the onus is on project teams to decide for themselves what the intent is and how best to actually get data that is informative and robust for them. You would need to follow up in a statement to actually defend why you have placed your monitor in what you deem the poorest outdoor air conditions, however. And if you feel that you need to actually go into more definitions or explanation, we welcome all of your input. Again, we are not in the position to police projects, but rather to help inform of what the intent of Reset Air is. So for projects consisting of 11 stories or more and designed with only one outdoor air intake, one outdoor monitor must be deployed at the air intake. And lastly, for projects consisting of 11 stories or more and designed with more than one outdoor air intake, you need to deploy one outdoor monitor at the lowest air intake and one at the highest air intake. Now, if the locations are neither higher nor lower, for example, if you have multiple air intakes located on a roof, we would ask that you deploy one monitor at the centrally located air intake. So there's a clarification regarding air volume. If you remember formerly in the pre-release version, volume was based on building size. And in version 2.0, air volume now means exactly that, the volume of air. So we're asking teams to actually calculate based on the HVAC system. This is not a brick and mortar building volume. So it's a better definition and a distinction of what the intent is. So the size and shape of a building is therefore somewhat irrelevant. A volume for Reset Core and Shell is not a physical calculation, but rather we're looking for the mechanical drawings and specifications that indicate what the total air volume of air is designed for your project. So again, we really do advise that you have an HVAC mechanical engineer familiar with the equipment for your building, especially if it's an existing structure. You need to be able to calculate that information accurately. Again, for indoor monitors, you can see the parameters that are required. Those remain unchanged from pre-release. And an important piece to remember is these are for post-filtration and post-mixing data collection. So you need to ensure that those monitors are placed after you have filtered the air, after they have been mixed. And again, a word about pairing. So pairing with outdoor monitors. For every outdoor monitor, as I described earlier, based on your building size, they have to be paired with an indoor monitor. So this pairing of indoor monitors to outdoor monitors is required until outdoor monitors have been paired throughout. Monitoring 30% of your total air volume is the next piece in the calculation, and I'm going to go over that in the following steps for a little bit more clarity with a practicum to make it a little bit easier to understand. So like CI, we have new steps for outdoor and indoor air monitoring deployment laid out for you here. The most significant changes, again, are going to occur, and like CI, I'm just going to walk through all those steps along with the images. So step number 1 is to define the project boundary. Now, similar to CI, we like to use definitions that other certifications have already laid out in front of us, so therefore we harmonize. For core and shell, a project boundary is based upon a building's mechanical system. So unlike CI, we really want to make sure that the core and shell project boundary includes all the mechanical systems associated with the project that support its operation. Our project boundary, again, once it's defined, must remain consistent for all subsequent calculations. And you need to submit a detailed statement to help us define, that helps define and helps us understand what you have deemed a project boundary. And here's an example of what that might look like as an assessment. In this particular scenario, I've got 18 occupied levels with 3 air intake locations. And you can see the image on the left is the bare bones, and on the right, I'm trying to indicate what my HVAC system is that dictates what would be my HVAC boundary. So again, the brick and mortar of the building does not really matter, but rather I'm trying to highlight what is my mechanical system within my project boundary. Now, this is a nicer graphic that explains the monitor deployment according to your project type. So for the stories that are listed, I can now see very clearly the number of outdoor air intakes in addition to what is required for monitor deployment and where that deployment would occur. So in my project, as I've mentioned, I have more than 11 stories and I've got greater than 1 air intake, which means, according to the standard, I need to deploy 1 monitor within a 5-meter radius of the lowest air intake and 1 within 5 meters of the highest air intake. Now, if you notice with my diagram, I have several air handling units and several air intakes, 2 on the roof and 1 at the lower level. So therefore, I need to place my monitor in a location that's 5 meters, and I can choose which of those 2 of the roof air handling units I would like to deploy at. In this case, in my image, I'm placing my monitor at the lowest level, of which there's only 1, and on the upper level, I'm placing it at the air intake that is on the unit to the right. And now we need to calculate the project's total air volume. As I mentioned, this is a pure calculation that is based solely on the math of what the air handling system is meant to deliver. In my example, the project is comprised of 18 floors with occupancy. Therefore, those are the ones that I concern myself for my project boundary. The mechanical system is designed with 3 air handling units, delivering air to those 18 occupied floors. Each of those air handling units is specified to deliver 17,000 cmh, or 10,000 CFM, to 6 floor blocks. So, air handling levels. The total air volume calculation is therefore simple math. 3 air handling units times my CMH, or CFM, to yield a total of 51,000 CMH, or 30,000 CFM. Again, these are easy calculations made when you have the information from your mechanical engineer and your equipment schedules. So calculating 30% of that, because that is the standard as outlined in Reset Air for Core and Shell, 30% of the project's total air volume must be calculated. So for indoor monitor coverage, it's a simple math equation. Again, 30% of either my CMH or CFM yields 15,300 CMH or 9,000 CFM. That is what I am required to cover as far as monitors being deployed on the project. Now in our example, my mechanical system is designed with air handling units that deliver 17,000 CMH or 10,000 CFM per 6-floor block. 15,300 CMH or 9,000 CFM is the total that must be covered. Therefore, a total indoor monitor required is only 1. And again, this is due to the air handling unit delivering a nice amount of air per 6-floor block. So, I deploy and pair that indoor monitor to my outdoor monitor. Now again, in my case, my math worked out very efficiently because the project has to deploy your indoor monitors co-locating them to your outdoor monitor locations. If only one indoor monitor is sufficient to meet your 30%, only one monitor is required to be paired with that outdoor monitor location, and this is of the team's choosing. You have to submit documentation that illustrates and why perhaps you've decided to deploy in that location. So, for example, you'll see my one indoor air monitor based on my 30% volume is co-located. I could have either placed it at my lower level or at my higher level air intake, pairing it with those outdoor locations that I was required to deploy at. It's really a team decision, but again, as long as the pairing occurs post-filtration and post-mixing for your indoor location. So once it's paired, it satisfies the intent, and if you had any other questions about that, indoor air monitoring would be simplified because you fulfilled the requirement of 30%. Now, step 6 is meant for projects where you, based on your math, may have more indoor air quality monitors because of the way that your air handling units are distributing air. If you have all of your outdoor monitors paired and a surplus of remaining indoor air monitors, you need to distribute those indoor air monitors equally across the air handling units that are delivering a representative 30% air to the project spaces. And again, this has to at least be post-filtration and post-mixing prior to any dampers that would actually slow the rate of airflow through the building. But the locations of these, once your outdoor monitors are paired, the locations of the remaining indoor monitors are up to team discretion. And that is the end of the core and shell deployment, but we have paired, in addition, some extra information about different terms in the glossary, including fresh air intake, monitors, what is the definition of an occupant, occupied spaces, the project boundary under the lens of core and shell, and then again some more information about what is meant by a regularly occupied space, return air, sensors, supply air, and VAV conditions. So hopefully that lends more information for any questions that may crop up as you're looking at your calculation and deployment plan. And that concludes the core and shell section and moves us into the certification process. Now again, as for changes in the certification process, just like CI, there is the requirement to submit a pre-deployment plan. Outside of that, not much has changed within the certification process. So again, having that proper plan for pre-deployment is really meant to safeguard against any errors that could occur in your monitor quantities and incorrect monitor deployment. So again, once that's approved, it's what the project team is held responsible for the purposes of your reset audit. So again, the submission of that pre-deployment. Otherwise, again, you would want to submit your project by going to project.reset.build. The site audit, again, is the boots on the ground portion of review, where the auditor would be looking at your indoor monitor placement and your outdoor monitor placement and ensure that they meet and adhere to your pre-deployment plan. They would be looking for consistency, and they'd be looking to ensure that you have everything according to what you submitted. And phase 4 is your data audit. Again, this is the portion of the performance to ensure that you're meeting the performance targets. Again, like CI, we talk a little bit about ongoing certification, such as the fees, performance check, your communication and education piece, and your site audit, and the flowchart. Again, like CI, we just want to make very clear the different phases involved to help you actually talk to your client about the timeline involved, as well as what could possibly happen if you fail any portions of these phases as you pursue certification. Again, I want to remind you that if you would like to do an estimate, there is a really great calculator on the reset.build website that would go through all the certification fees and itemize them for you based on project size. So please make sure that you utilize that tool at reset.build/certification. And that concludes the air process for core and shell. Now, as a reminder, I want you again to utilize the tools that are available at reset.build, the pricing calculator, as mentioned, being one of them, where you are able to enter a project and look at the different standard type you are looking for, whether it's commercial interiors or core and shell. And by putting in the size of your project and then indicating what currency you would like, you can actually view an estimate. And currently we offer currency conversions in US dollars, renminbi, and British silver. From that pricing estimate, it will itemize the different pieces of the certification, including your documentation audit and the site audit. Then you will also have the ability to print a PDF. And this is a handy way if you wanted to talk to a prospective client about the hard costs that are involved with the Reset certification. And I want to remind you of a couple things that are coming down the pipeline. Not only can you download the Reset Air Standard for Core and Shell version 2.0 and Air Standard for Commercial Interiors version 2.0 from the website, you can also look forward to a couple of companion standards that will be coming. The Reset Air Standard for accredited monitors, the Reset Air Standard for accredited data providers, the standard air methodology for data analysis, and the test procedure for accredited monitors. So utilizing those companion standards coming up in the near future are also going to be available tools for your ease of understanding our methodologies, as well as talking to your clients in depth about the Reset Air Standard. And then looking ahead, as I mentioned, we will be developing our AP training and exam schedule for the remainder of 2018. So we would like to reach out to all of you and take your requests. If you would like us to bring an AP training to your town, please make sure that you let us know. We'll be looking for a way for you to cast your bid on the Reset.build website soon, so keep your eye on that. We'll be happy to bring a Reset training to your town if we're available to do so, and this is on a global scale. So please, no matter where you are in the world, we would like to bring Reset training and a practicum to you. And with that, I'd like to again thank you. If you have questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, the email that's listed, and we look forward to all of you passing your version 2.0 AP exam, allowing you to bring your expertise on indoor air quality to projects around the world. Thank you again.